Check, 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 check. Hey, Shalom Israel. Most High in Christ bless. Good morning. Can everybody hear and see? Type Y in the chat. Hear me? Mm-mm. Okay, cool. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. This is History in the AM. I'm Captain Azariah. Uh Today we're gonna continue in the Babylonian captivity. And just to recap, this will be part three. We've already did two parts. You can actually go and watch that on IUIC Oklahoma's page. Going forward, though, we'll be broadcasting here on IUIC Daily Bread. So make sure y'all like, subscribe, share it, get the subscribers up, so that everybody can be notified when we have these classes. Just to recap, where we're at in history, like I said, part one and part two, you'll get more full in depth of the history of the Babylonian captivity, from the time of Assyria leading all the way up to the time of Persia. Uh, to recap, basically all of Israel has been taken into captivity, where we're at thus far in part three. You had the first wave that went out with Jehoiakim, um, who did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. Excuse me. And that first wave came, Nebuchadnezzar came, besieged Israel for 3 years, took him captive, and also took some of Israel into Babylon. And you had those like Daniel, Azariah, Mishael, Hananiah, um, those young men being taken into captivity under that first wave. Then you had his son that came up and reigned in his seed, Jehoiachin, whose name is Jeconiah, whose name was changed to Jehoiachin, whose original name was Jeconiah. He was that second wave that came. Nebuchadnezzar came, took him captive, bound him, and took a lot of us, the bulk of us, into Babylon. Um, and then Nebuchadnezzar set up um, a man by the name of Zedekiah, who his name was changed as well. Matter of fact, his name was Mattaniah, and his name was changed to Zedekiah. Um, and the king Nebuchadnezzar had set him up, and then ultimately you had Nebuzardian, who came and basically completely wiped out Jerusalem, burnt the temple, uh, burnt down Jerusalem. Esau was right there when you read in Second Chronicles 36, and basically took the remainder of us into Babylon, except the poor of the land. Those were left in Babylon. Like we read before. That's why when you read in Bel and the Dragon, you read about Habakkuk still being in Jerusalem, because those were those poor sort of the land that was left in Jerusalem um whenever Babylon came and completely wiped us out. And then that's why, as you read on, Gedaliah was set up as a governor, and then he was killed, and then those that lived in the land were there. Uh, Many of them fled to Egypt. Some of them scattered throughout, like Jeremiah. Jeremiah actually went back because he was in jail. He was in prison during that time. He was released. Nebuzaradan allowed him to go wherever he wanted to go, freed him, and he decided to go back to Jerusalem. So, um, in part one and part two, we kind of touched on everyone that was in Jerusalem, what was taking place in Jerusalem whenever Babylon came and began to conquer us. Uh, Now we're going to kind of switch gears and talk about what was going on and taking place for Israel that was in already in Babylon. Like I said, there were three or four. There were three main waves of people that was taken, and that's where when you're reading these scriptures, especially when it comes to the history, a lot of times you read chapters and verses. We say this all the time. There's a lot of time that passes in between from verse to verse, chapter to chapter, things of that nature. So a lot of times you might get in a habit of reading from chapter 24 to 25 and think it happened like that. When in all actuality, no, it didn't happen like that. There was 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years that might have passed in between versus the scriptures. So keep that in mind when you're really piecing together this history and really trying to understand your history. So uh, now we're going to touch on those that were in Babylon at the time, because it wasn't just, yeah, things was happening in Jerusalem. Things were happening in Jerusalem whenever Babylon was coming against us, and we read all of that extensively in part one and part two about how what was happening to Jeremiah, how Esau was coming and burning the temple, all the things that was going on in Jerusalem leading up to us being taken captive. Now let's deal with those that were uh in Babylon already. Because remember, when you go to Second Kings 24, matter of fact, I'm gonna touch a couple scriptures just to recap those that were taken into Babylon, then we'll jump into that. So Second Kings 24, let's start at verse 1. And it says, in his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years. That's when Nebuchadnezzar began to besiege Jerusalem. It says, then he turned and rebelled against him, meaning Jehoiakim rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. Because when you read up in chapter 23, whenever these other nations would basically make our king servants, they would pay tribute to them. And basically, they were you read a good example. Matter of fact, hold that. You read a good example, just to recap, in Romans, with the scribes and Pharisees on where it says he rebelled against him. He became his servant and rebelled against him. Matter of fact, John 11, real quick, read it real quick. John 11 and verse 48. It says, if we let him thus alone, talking about Christ, this was the scribes and Pharisees basically had a council of what they should do because Christ was doing so many miracles. It says, if we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him, and the Romans shall come and take away both our place and nation. Why? Because they were set up by Rome to be rulers and governors in that area. That's why when you read through the New Testament, just a sidebar, um, like when dealing with Pilate and dealing with, even when you get to the book of the Acts, many times they tell them, y'all deal with them according to your laws and your customs because they were set up over the people. Similar to what you're reading here in Kings, where it says Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years and he rebelled against him. So let's go back, Second Kings 24 and 1 again. It says, in his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him. The Lord sent against him bands of the Chaldeans, and bands of the Syrians, and bands of the Moabites, meaning armies. Um, and bands of the children of Ammon, and sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake by his servant the prophets. Surely at the commandment of the Lord came this upon Judah, to remove them out of his sight for the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he did, and also for the innocent blood which he shed. For he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, which the Lord would not pardon. So this was that first wave of Israelites that were taken captive, along with Jehoiakim, as well as they went into the house of the Lord and took certain things out of there when you read in Chronicles. Now, watch this. Let's jump down to verse 12. Matter of fact, verse 11. It says, and Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came against the city, and his servants did besiege it. And Jehoiachin, the king of Judah, went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother and his servants, and his princes and his officers. And the king of Babylon took him in the 8th year of his reign. And he carried out thence all the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house, and cut it in pieces all the vessels of gold which Solomon, king of Israel, had made in the temple of the Lord, as the Lord had said. And he carried away all Jerusalem, and all the princes, and all the mighty men of valor, even 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and smiths. None remains save the poor sort of the people of the land. So this is that second wave that was taken uh out of Jerusalem into Babylon. Now, when you jump over to chapter 22nd, now I'm going through this briefly because this is a quick recap just to show you uh, it wasn't just one clean sweep. There was a process of time of us being taken out of the land, taken captive out of the land. Same thing with the Assyrian captivity with Northern Kingdom. So, Second Kings 25. Let's start at verse 11. It says, now the rest of the people that were left in the city, and the fugitives that fell away to the king of Babylon, with the remnant of the multitude, did Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carry away. Captain of the guard left of the poor of the land to be vine dressers and husbandmen. So after this, after Nebuchadnezzar came through, this last wave took the rest of the people that remained, the fugitives, those that escaped, and Esau got them. When you read Second Chronicles 36, where it says those that had escaped the sword, he laid wait. Also, you read in Obadiah, the rest of them they carried captives, and he left vine dressers and husbandmen in the land. That's why when you go to Bel and the Dragon with Habakkuk, it says he was coming from the field with the reapers. Matter of fact, let's read it real quick. Bel and the Dragon. Bel and the Dragon. Bel and the Dragon. Verse. Dragon verse 33. It says, now there in Jewry a prophet called Habakkuk, who had made pottage. Now, Bel and the Dragon history, that's during the Persian and Mede captivity. We'll touch Bel and the Dragon more extensively once we get out of Babylon and into the Persian and Mede captivity. But I'm just going here to show you that Habakkuk was left there during that time of Nebuchadnezzar, because he left vine dressers and husbandmen to keep the land. And that's why when you read in Bel and the Dragon where Habakkuk was coming from. Bel and the Dragon, verse 33. It says, now there was in Jewry a prophet called Habakkuk, who made pottage and had broken bread in a bowl, and was going into the field for to bring it to the reapers. These were the people, the husbandmen and vine dressers that was left in the land. So now let's go back. So that was that third wave that was taken into Babylon. So now, what was taking place in Babylon while all this was going on? Like I said, go back and watch part 1 and part 2. I just did a quick recap of us being taken. We go more in depth. I go more in depth in part 1 and part 2 of what was taking place in Jerusalem. Now let's backtrack and let's take place of what was going on in Babylon while these waves was being taken, while Jerusalem was destroyed, things of that. So let's start with the history of Susanna. Start there. History of Susanna. Let me read. Here we go. History of Susanna. We will start at verse 1. It says, there dwelt a man in Babylon named Jehoiakim, and he took a wife whose name was Susanna, the daughter of Chelcias, a very fair woman, and one that feared the Lord. Now, this Jehoiakim, and you read this name Joachim uh, throughout the scriptures. Now, what you're going to learn with Israel. Same thing we do today. Many many people have the same names. So now this is where you go precept upon precept to be able to understand who is who and what person over here is actually who is over there. Because you're going to read many of the same names. Also, uh, uh, names translate from the Hebrew into the Greek when you get to the Apocrypha. So names change. That's like when you read First Ezra's 1, where all their names are in Greek, but it's talking about those 12 prophets when you're taking Ezra's 1:37. So who is this Jehoiakim? Now watch this. Let's go to Baruch first because you read the name Joachim in a few different places in the Apocrypha. You read it in Baruch, you also read it in Judith. So now let's get a clear understanding of who this is or who this is not. Let's go to Baruch 1 first, because this is another instance where you read the name Joachim or Joachim, Joachim or Joacim. So now let's go to Baruch 1 and verse 1. It says, and these are the words of the book which Baruch, the son of Neriah, which is Neriah, the son of uh, um, Manassas, the son of Sadius, the son of Azadias, the son of Chelcias, wrote in Babylon. So this is the book. Baruch was written in Babylon. So Baruch was a part of one of those waves that was taken into Babylon, specifically the second wave that was taken. Because as you read on, matter of fact, verse 2, it says, and Baruch did read the words of this book in the hearing of Jeconias, the son of Jehoiakim. That Jeconias is Jehoiachin, or Coniah or Jeconias in the Greek. That is that the second king, that or that second wave that was taken. Uh, uh, Baruch was taken along with that because this letter was wrote in Babylon. Watch this. Let's jump down to verse 7. It says, and they sent into Jerusalem unto Jehoiachim the high priest, the son of Chelcias, son of Salem. Now, this Jehoiakim right here, watch this. Let's go to First Corinthians 6 and 13. Because right here it says Jehoiakim the high priest, the son of Salem, the son of Chelcias, the son of Salem. Let's go to First Chronicles 6 and 13, so that you can understand who this man was, and it's not the same person that you read in History of Susanna. So there's no confusion. Because you read the same names, you read those names here in Baruch, and Jehoiakim and Chelcias. Same thing with Baruch. You read his father was Chelcias. You also read in History of Susanna, Jehoiakim and Chelcias. Also in Judith, which we'll get to that in a second. You read the name. So who is this in Baruch? First Chronicles 6, we're going to start at verse uh 13. It says, and Shallum beget Hilkiah, and Hilkiah beget Azariah. Azariah beget Sariah. So chapter 13 is who we're reading about in Baruch. That Jehoiakim there is actually Azariah, the high priest, uh, who was the son of Hilkiah. When you look up Hilkiah, Chelcias is the Greek word, the Greek transliteration. I know I'm pronouncing it wrong. Those that know how to pronounce it, you know what I'm talking about. Matter of fact, let's get just to show that names translate between languages. Let's get let's get Revelations real quick. Get Revelations, the ninth chapter, and verse 11. It says, and they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue it hath his name Apollyon, showing you that names translate between languages. So when you read here in Chronicles, you read the name Hilkiah, but when you read in The Apocrypha, which is was translated from the Greek, it's Chelseus. That's that same person, Hilkiah. So right here you read Second Chronicles 6 and 13 again. It says, and Shalom beget Hilkiah, and Hilkiah beget Azariah. So when you go back to Baruch, that's the same lineage that you read in Baruch 1 and 7. Baruch 1 and 7 again. It says, and they sent to Jerusalem unto Jehoiakim the high priest, the son of Chelseus, which is Hilkiah, and the son of Salem, which is Shalom, and to the priest and to all the people which were found with him at Jerusalem. So this Chelseus and this Jehoiakim is a different Chelseus and Jehoiakim that you read about in history of Susanna. Now let's get Judith real quick. And I'm going to these places just because in your readings and in your studies, you might read these same names and think that they're the same people, but they line up. Let's go to Judith real quick. Judith 4 and I'm gonna start at we'll read 4 and 8. Judith 4 and verse 8. It says, and the children of Israel did as Jehoiakim, there's the name again, the high priest had commanded them with the ancient of all the people of Israel which dwelt at Jerusalem. Now, this Jehoiakim, the high priest, is not the same Jehoiakim, the high priest we just read in Baruch, because the Judith is during the Assyrian captivity, which we will go into detail once. I mean, not the Assyrian, the Persian and Mede captivity, which we will go into more detail once we get out of Babylon and going into the Persian and Mede. Who is this? Let's go to First Ezra 5 real quick. First Ezra 5 and 5. Oh, First Ezra 5 verse 5. It says, let's start up at I will get to the point. First Ezra 5 and 5. It says, the priest, sons of Phinehas, the son of Aaron, Jesus, the son of Jehosadek, the son of Sarias, and Jehoiakim, the son of Zerubbabel, the son of Salathiel of the house of David, out of the kindred of Pharisees of the tribe of Judah, which wise sentences before Darius. So these are all the people of these are all the people that were there during the time when the temple was built. This Jehoiakim is that same Jehoiakim you're reading about in Judith. Because when you read in Judith, great fear came upon the people because you had Nebuchadnezzar, which this is Nebuchadnezzar the fourth. Some say it's the third, Nebuchadnezzar the third or the fourth. Uh, Basically, this was during the time of the Persian Medes, during King, I believe it was Cambias. Uh, but when you read in the Bible, it's going to say Arphaxad. Um, this was during that time where basically Babylon was trying to rear its head up and make a advance to try to basically take the kingdom back over with Persian and Medes, but that got stomped out real quick. So that's the history you're reading about in Judith when you read about Nebuchadnezzar. That's not the same Nebuchadnezzar that came and overthrew Jerusalem during the time of Babylon. So now let's go back to history of Susanna. History of Susanna. All right, history of Susanna, verse 1 again. It says, there dwelt a man in Babylon called Jehoiakim, took a wife whose name was Susanna, the daughter of Chelseas, a very fair woman, and one that feared the Lord. So now this particular Jehoiakim and this Chelseas, they're not the same as the ones we just read. This is a completely different set of people. And that was my point that I was bringing out, that you're going to read the same names because Israel, just like we do today, many people take on the same names. You have like today, you have many Azariahs, you have many Anathiases, you have many people that take on the same name, Davids, things of that nature. Same thing with our people when you read during the time of the kings and during biblical times. You read the same names. So now let's jump down to, because we're not gonna read the whole book of history of Susanna. When you get a chance, go through and read the whole book of the history of Susanna because it is some good history. But we're gonna touch on key points in the history of Susanna of kind of what was going on during those that was taken captive into Babylon. Because the history of Susanna falls somewhere before Daniel 1. Like, let's get it. Daniel 1. It falls somewhere before Daniel 1. Before it falls somewhere during the time that Jehoiakim was taken when we left in when we read in Second Kings 24 and 1, where basically they Nebuchadnezzar came, sent armies, and took some of us captive, up until you read here in Daniel 1 and 3 and 4. It's somewhere in between that time frame history of Susanna took place. And how you know that is the history you read about Daniel. Because at this point, Daniel wasn't taken and made a eunuch. Reading Daniel 1, was taken, put into the king's palace, and basically they were made eunuchs and they served in the palace. So the history of Susanna. Let's jump down to verse 4. Let's read. Matter of fact, we'll read on verse 3. It says, and her parents also were righteous and taught their daughter according to the law of Moses. Now Jehoiakim was a great rich man and had a fair garden joining into his house. And to him resorted the Jews because he was more honorable than all the others. The same year were appointed two of the ancients of the people to be judges. Now, in captivity, some of our people were at a low estate. Some of our people, the Lord took care of. You read that in Isaiah, where it talks about their bread shall their water and bread shall be sure. Jeremiah, you read Jeremiah even told those that was in Babylon to build ye houses, dwell therein, plant vineyards, things of that nature. So you did have some people that was in Babylon, like Jehoiakim, who was well off. Same thing you see here in this captivity here in America. Some of our people are at different statuses within the captivity that we're in, and that's what you're reading here. Now, verse 5, it says, the same year were appointed two of the ancients of the people to be judges, such as the Lord spake of. That wickedness came from Babylon, from the ancient judges who seemed to govern the people. Watch this. Let's go to Jeremiah 29 real quick. What is that talking about? It says the same year there were appointed two of the ancients of the people to be judges. Because while we were in Babylon, you had some of the, it says the ancient of the people were being appointed to be judges or self-proclaimed prophets, appointing themselves to be judges over the people, but they were wicked as hell, just like these two right here. And Daniel called them out. They were wicked as hell. Now let's go to Jeremiah 29 real quick, because the history of, because remember, some of us were still in Jerusalem, some of us were in Babylon. So there was a lot of back and forth, letters being sent to Jerusalem to the high priest. We're going to read in Baruch, or we read in Baruch. We didn't read it all. We're going to go back and read it though, because I was supposed to read down to 14. You read about letters being sent back and forth. Baruch 7, it says they sent letters unto the Jehoiakim, the high priest who was in Jerusalem. So there was a lot of back and forth and communication between those that was in Jerusalem and those that was in Babylon. Um, Here's an example right here. Let's go to Jeremiah 29, and we're going to start at verse 21. It says, thus saith the Lord of the hosts, God of Israel, of Ahab the son of Koliah, and of Zedekiah the son of Manasseh, which prophesy a lie unto you in my name. Behold, I will deliver them into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and he shall slay them before your eyes. And of them shall be taken up a curse by all the captivity of Judah, which are in Babylon. saying, the Lord make thee like Zedekiah and like Ahab, whom the king of Babylon roasted in the fire, because they have committed villainy in Israel, and have committed adultery with their neighbors' wives, and have spoken lies in my name, which I have not commanded them, even I know, and I am a witness, thus saith the Lord. So these were the examples, just like you read in History of Susanna. Those ancients that were set up as judges in Babylon, they were doing the same thing. They wanted to commit adultery with Susanna. This, what we're reading in Jeremiah 29, is an example. That's why I'm gonna go back and read History of Susanna real quick. We're coming back to Jeremiah. History of Susanna, verse 5 again. It says, the same year were appointed two of the ancients of the people to be judges, which as the Lord spake of, that wickedness came from Babylon, from ancient judges who seemed to govern the people. The Lord spoke it, wickedness would come from them as they seem to govern the people. Let's go back to Jeremiah 29 and verse 24. 29 and 24. It says, thus shalt thou also speak to Shemaiah, the Helamite, saying. So they spoke about Zedekiah and Ahab. Now he says, speak to Shemaiah, the Helamite, saying, verse 25, thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, saying, because thou hast sent letters in my name unto all the people that are at Jerusalem, and to Zephaniah, the son of Mahasiah, uh, Mahasiah, the priest, and to all the priests, saying, the Lord hath made thee priest instead of Jehoiada the priest, that ye should be officers in the house of the Lord for every man that is mad and maketh himself a prophet, that thou shouldest put him in prison and in the stocks. So you had this man Shemaiah who sent letters to Jerusalem. He was in Babylon. He sent letters to all Jerusalem, basically saying, the Lord has made me high priest instead of Jehoiada. And anybody that's saying that they're a prophet, put them in prison, put them in jail. That's what we're reading here in History of Susanna. The same example. It says the same year were appointed two of the ancients of the people to made themselves governors. They was wicked. Watch this. Where are we at? Verse 27. It says in Jeremiah, it says, now therefore, why hast thou not reproved Jeremiah of Anotha, which maketh himself a prophet to you? So now he's saying, why ain't you why ain't you reprove Jeremiah? Because according to you, he's made himself a prophet. Verse 28, it says, for therefore he sent unto us in Babylon, saying, this captivity is long, meaning 70 years. Build ye houses and dwell in them, and plant gardens and eat the fruit of them. That's, you read that up in the chapter 29, 1 to like verse 7 and 8. He sent that to Babylon, telling them the captivity is long, 70 years to be exact. Build houses, dwell therein, plant vineyards, have sons and daughters. Watch this, verse 29. And Zephaniah the priest read this letter in the ears of Jeremiah the prophet. What letter? The letter that Shemaiah had sent to Jerusalem. It was read to Jeremiah. Verse 31, it says, send to all them of the captivity, saying, thus saith the Lord concerning Shemaiah the Neelamite, because that Shemaiah hath prophesied unto you, and I sent him not, and he caused you to trust in a lie. Therefore, thus saith the Lord, behold, I will punish Shemaiah the Neelamite and his seed, and he shall not have a man to dwell among this people, neither shall he behold the good that I will do for my people, saith the Lord, because he hath taught rebellion against the Lord. So he was sending letters to Jerusalem, appointing himself as a priest, appointing himself as a judge over the people, Jeremiah, and then basically said, anybody that's saying they're a prophet, put them in prison. Jeremiah heard it. They read the letter. He sent a letter back to all those of the captivity, all those in Babylon, basically saying, don't Shemaiah is a false prophet. He's a liar. He has caused you to trust in a lie. Therefore, he ain't gonna have a man. His seed he shall not produce a man amongst the people, and he's basically gonna be cut off because he taught rebellion against the Lord. So this is an example of that back and forth, those letters that you read from those that was in, because Jeremiah was in Jerusalem at the time. Because remember, Baruch was in Babylon, Jeremiah was in Jerusalem. Baruch was Jeremiah's scribe. So there was a lot of back and forth. Here is an example of letters being sent to Jerusalem and Jeremiah sending letters back to them that was of the captivity of these wicked men that was setting themselves up in Babylon. Same thing we're reading here in the history of Susanna. You had these two ancient of the people judges that appointed themselves, and it was wicked as hell. It's just like Shemaiah, just like Zedekiah, all those that was appointing themselves judges over the people, over those over the people in Babylon. So before we go there, let's go to Baruch, back to Baruch real quick, just to show the back and forth between those that was in Jerusalem and those that was in Babylon. Baruch chapter 1, verse 7. Again, it says, "And they sent to Jerusalem unto Jehoiakim the high priest, the son of Chelcias, the son of Salem, and to the priest, and to all the people which were found with him at Jerusalem. At the same time, when he received the vessels of the house of the Lord, that were carried out of the temple to return them into the land of Judah, the 10th day of the month of Siphon, namely silver vessels, which Sadeuses, I know I jacked that name up, and the son of Josias, king of Judah, had made. After that, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away Jeconias and the princes and the captives and the mighty men and the people of the land from Jerusalem and brought them to Babylon. And they said, Behold, we have sent you money to buy you burnt offerings and sin offerings and incense and prepared ye manna and offered upon the altar of the Lord our God. So they sent money. They sent these letters to Jehoiakim. They also sent money that they would buy burnt offerings, and they would buy sin offerings and incense and prepare manna to offer on the altar to the Lord. Because remember, at this point in time, we're reading, the temple was still standing. The temple was still there because that was during the second wave when Jehoiachin, not Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim was his father. Jehoiachin was taken captive. They were sending money back to Jerusalem for the priests to buy burnt offerings and to offer them upon the Lord. And watch this, verse 11. And this is what they said, and pray for the life of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and for the life of Belteshazzar, his son, that their days may be upon earth as the days of heaven. And the Lord will give us strength and lighten our eyes, and we shall live under the shadow of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and under the shadow of Belteshazzar, his son, and we shall serve them many days and find favor in their sight. So they sent money to have an offering bought and burnt upon the altar, and that the priest would pray for the life of Nebuchadnezzar and his son, that those that were in the captivity would find favor in their sight. Same thing we pray for today. We pray for and we pray to the Lord open doors. Pray for the Lord that we find favor in the sight of our enemies so that we can maneuver through this captivity. Because ultimately this isn't our rest. Same thing with here you read in Babylon. These men understood this ain't our rest. But hey, Lord, have mercy on us that we find favor so that we can and we will live under the shadow of Nebuchadnezzar because we in captivity. It was already said 70 years we're gonna be here. So pray that we have mercy and we find favor. Watch this, verse 13. It says, Pray for us also unto the Lord our God, for we have sinned against the Lord our God. And to this day, the fury of the Lord and his wrath have not turned from us. Why? What is the fury in the Lord or the wrath? Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. That's what they're talking about. That hasn't turned from them because they were in captivity. Their names were being changed. You read that all. We just read that many a times with the kings. Jehoiakim was a prime example. His name was Jeconiah. It was changed to Jehoiakim. They were taken into another land. They had yokes of iron on their necks. The fear of the Lord wasn't turned from them at that time. So they were sending letters, sending money to Jerusalem for them to offer up sin offerings, burnt offerings for forgiveness of sin, and that they might find favor in their captivity. Verse 14, it says, "And ye shall read this book which we have sent unto you to make confession in the house of the Lord upon the feast solemn days. Ye shall say, to the Lord our God belongeth righteousness, but unto us the confusion of faces, as it is come to pass this day, to them of Judah and into the inhabitants of Jerusalem, to our kings and into our princes and to our priests and to our prophets and to our fathers, for we have sinned before the Lord." So this is what you had: a remnant in Babylon, just like you do in every captivity. Same thing we read in Assyria. You have a remnant that feared God and kept his commandments, that were living in Babylon. And the Lord showed favor. Same thing we read in History of Susanna. That family feared God and kept his commandments. Jehoiakim feared God. Chelcias and his daughter, they feared God, and the Lord showed favor and showed mercy on them in their captivity. Same thing we ask for here today, that the Lord show favor, that we're able to maneuver in this captivity, because we understand this ain't our rest. This ain't our kingdom. We're trying to get the hell up out of here, and the only way to do that is by keeping God's commandments. But while we're in this captivity, we ask for the Lord to show mercy, to show favor, so that we're able to move and do the things we need to do, put in the work we need to put in this captivity. So let's go back to History Susanna. History Susanna and verse 5 again. All right, History Susanna, verse 5. It says, "The same year were appointed two of the men of the ancients of the people to be judges, such as the Lord spake of, that wickedness came from Babylon, from the ancient judges who seemed to govern the people. These kept much at Jehoiakim's house, and all that had any suits in law came unto them." Verse 7, it says, "Now when the people departed away at noon, Susanna went into her husband's garden to walk." Now, as you read on in this chapter, you had the two. Susanna went into her garden, and as you read down, she went into the area to bathe, and she was naked. And these two perverts, call them what they are, these two quote unquote judges came in, and basically the spirit of adultery was heavy on them, to the point they would sit by the tree and watch, and eventually that lust burned into them, to where uh they wanted to come in unto Susanna. Matter of fact, let's jump down to verse 14. Matter of fact, verse 11, it says, "But they were ashamed to declare their lust, that they desired to have to do with her. Yet they watched diligently from day to day to see her." They were diligent day to day. They was there looking for her, going into the bar, looking for her. Ooh, that's how much that lust had was burned in them. Because we read about it. These men that were appointing themselves, they were wicked as hell, just like we read in Jeremiah 29. Now, verse 13, it says, "And one said to the other, Let us now go home, for it is dinner time. So when they were gone out, they departed one from the other, and turned back again. They came to the same place." This was how perverted they were in their own mind, because they didn't know each other one was lusting, and they somehow came together, and neither one rebuked each other. Now we're reading right here. They was like, "All right, it's dinner time. We're gonna leave and go." And they both had the idea of, "All right, I'm gonna tell him it's dinner time. He gonna leave, and then I'm gonna come back and get her for myself." They both had the same idea, so they both turned around and came back and met each other. Matter of fact, verse 15, verse 14 again. It says, "So when they were gone out, they departed the one from the other, and turning back again, they came to the same place. After they had asked one another the cause, they acknowledged their lust. Then appointed they a time both together, when they might find her alone." So when they came back, They both was going back for what you doing back here? Why are you back here? And then they both declared, I'm here because I'm lusting after. I want Susanna. And then they both came on one accord. It was like, all right, this one we're gonna meet. We're gonna meet at this time at night, to that we might find her alone. Verse 15, it says, and it fell out as they watched a fit time. She was in as before with two maids only. She was desirous to wash herself in the garden, for it was hot. And there was nobody there save the two elders that had hid themselves and watched her. They freaking peeping toms, freaking, they was some perverts. 17. Then she said to her maids, bring me oil and washing balls, and shut the garden doors that I may wash me. They did as she bade them, and shut the garden doors, and went out themselves at privy doors to fetch the things which that she had commanded them. But she saw not the elders which were hid. Now when the maids were gone forth, the two elders rose up and ran unto her, saying, behold, the garden doors are shut, that no man can see us, and we are in love with thee. Therefore consent unto us and lie with us. They basically was trying to go both together, go and run a train on Susanna. Call it like it is. And a lot of the time, I'm telling you, you wonder why people are so vile and filthy today, and you think that that couldn't have happened back then. You crazy. These are the same spirits that's back here on the earth that is doing the same thing. These two nasty Negroes was basically waited till the door was shut. They was alone. They both ran up together and they wanted to both lie with her. Verse 21. And if thou wilt not, we will bear witness against thee that a young man was with thee, and therefore thou didst send away thy maids from thee. Then Susanna sighed and said, I am straitened on every side, for if I do this thing, it is death unto me. And if I do it not, I cannot escape your hands. This sister was in the spirit. She said, she's like, I'm straightened on every side. My hands is tied. If I do this, if I lay down with y'all, the Lord gonna put me to death. But if I don't do it, uh uh I ain't gonna be able to escape out of your hands. Either way, I'm gonna die. Watch this. Verse 23. Watch what she says. Verse 23. It is better for me to fall into your hands and not do it than to sin in the sight of the Lord. She said, it's better for you to kill me than than me to fall into the hands of the Lord. Now, watch this. Let's jump down to verse 28. Verse 28. It says, and it came to pass the next day, when the people were assembled to her husband Jehoiakim, the two elders came also full of mischievous imaginations against Susanna to put her to death. So she wasn't finna lie with them, so they did what they said they was gonna do. They went with all type of mischievous imaginations. They was probably saying all kind of crazy stuff. You know how Israel get down. They put all the salt on it to try to get her to be put to death. Now let's jump down to verse 45. So now as they were striving, going back and forth, she was about to get put to death based off these two witnesses. Because the scripture said, the mouth of two or three witnesses, let every word be established. So as you read down, she began weeping. Her friend her friends wept because she was a righteous sister. And now you had this false accusation come upon her. But watch this. Let's jump down to verse 45. Therefore, when she was led to be put to death, the Lord raised up the Holy Spirit of a young youth whose name was Daniel. So as she was about to go get to put to death, the Lord raised up Daniel, stirred up the spirit in Daniel of a young youth. This right here lets you know kind of the time period as to why I was saying it was sometime after Second Kings 24 and 1, where we were taken, but before Daniel 1, where he was those they were basically made eunuchs and taken into the king's house. Uh, oh, let me word it correctly because I know I'm butchering it. They were taken into I believe it says king's palace. Yeah, the king's palace. They were basically standing in the king's palace. It was sometime before that, but after they were taken Babylon. So now, verse 45, it says, therefore, when she was led to be put to death, the Lord raised up the Holy Spirit of a young youth whose name was Daniel, who cried with a loud voice, I am clear from the blood of this woman. He basically said, look, I'm clear of the blood of this woman. Spirit was on him. He understood that these two elders are wicked as hell, and they are bringing they were false witnesses, and they were bringing a false report against the daughter of Sarah. Verse 47, it says, then all the people turned them toward him and said, what mean these words that thou hast spoken? It says, so he standing in the midst of them said, are ye such fools, ye sons of Israel, that without examination or knowledge of the truth ye have condemned a daughter of Israel? Return again to the place of judgment, for they have borne false witnesses against her. So now as you read on, Daniel drilled them. He separated the two elders. He asked them both the same question, and they both had two different answers. Basically, under what tree did they find her? One said, I believe, an elm tree, and the other said a mastic tree. Uh, their stories didn't line up, which showed that they were lying. And as you read on, those two elders were put to death, and Susanna was saved. Matter of fact, let's jump down to verse 63. Therefore, Chelseus and his wife praised God for their daughter Susanna, with Jehoiakim her husband, and all the kindred, because there was no dishonesty found in her. From that day forth, Daniel had in great reputation in the sight of the people. From that day forth, Daniel, amongst Israel, Daniel already had a great reputation from that day forth. That's why, let's go to Ezekiel real quick. That's why Ezekiel mentions him. Because from this time forth, as a young youth, he was already in great reputation amongst Israel. Once you get to the book of Daniel, the Lord put the spirit on him to understand the dreams and the visions of Nebuchadnezzar, which put him in great reputation out of all Babylon. Not only Israel, but also Babylon, to the point to where, just like Joseph, he was basically second to Nebuchadnezzar, similar to Joseph. Uh, but let's go to Ezekiel 28. Just real quick. This is why Ezekiel mentioned it. 'Cause you got to keep in mind, I said it in previous lessons. All the prophets were around the same time period during Babylon. Many of the prophets, so a lot of them, they knew who these people were. That's why when you read in, I believe it's in Matthew, where they were questioning Christ and they were asking him who he was. Were you some prophet? Were you Jeremiah? The Were you John? The Israel talk. Y'all know how Israel talks. They love drama and gossip, for lack of better words. So news spreads throughout. So that's what you're reading here in the history of Susanna, where it says he was in great reputation among the people. So Israel began to talk about the history of Susanna and what happened and what took place. And there was other prophets around, like Ezekiel right here. So let's Ezekiel 28 real quick, and verse where's it at? Verse 3. Now when you read Ezekiel 28, this is going into Esau. It refers to him as the prince of Tyrus, but it's talking about Esau as you read in the chapter. I'm just going here to show Ezekiel making mention of Daniel and his wisdom. It says, behold, thou art wiser than Daniel. There is no secret that they can hide from thee. So Ezekiel knew of the wisdom and understanding that Daniel had. That's what you read in the history of Susanna, where it talks about he was in great reputation amongst the people. So now let's go to it. Let's go to Daniel 2. Daniel 2. So keep in mind, these are all the things that are taking place in Babylon while Jerusalem was being besieged and uh, taken over and eventually overcome and burnt to the ground. These were the things that were taking place in Babylon during that time, just so you can understand. So now, Daniel, the second chapter. Daniel chapter 2, verse 1, it says, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams wherewith his spirit was troubled and his sleep break from him. Now, this is the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. This is during the time of Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim, yes. Whenever you read Second Kings 24:1, where it says he became his servant 3 years, this was the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. So it was during that time period you're reading Daniel, the first chapter. That's why Daniel chapter 1, it happened uh uh after that. And just so y'all know, when you're reading the book of Daniel, and you're gonna see as we go through Daniel, because a lot of the history that happened in Babylon, you read in the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel is not in chronological order. It's not from chapter to chapter in chronological order. You're going to read many examples. Like here, chapter 2 was before chapter 1. Oh, no. Chapter 2 was after chapter 1. But you go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you skip to 7. 7 was during the time of Babylon, but chapter 5 was the destruction of Babylon. Then you might get to chapter 6, which is Persian and Mede, but then you read chapter 7. That vision happened during the time of Babylon. So Daniel is not necessarily in chronological order. So chapter 1 in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, that's when Nebuchadnezzar came up into Babylon uh, um, and besieged it. And that third year was, we read in Second Kings 24, where it says he became his servant 3 years. And then after that third year, he rebelled. And then Nebuchadnezzar came up and besieged it and began to overtake Jerusalem. And this was that first wave I was talking about. Daniel was a part of that. So now when you get to chapter 2, this is the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign after he took Jehoiakim captive and brought many of the people into Babylon, as well as Daniel. Daniel was made a eunuch at this time, was in the king's palace uh, when you get to chapter 2. Now we're going to read all of chapter 2, but just so you can kind of know historically where it took place, chapter 2 takes place during the time of Second Kings 24, during that verse 1 through I believe it's 5, during that era. After he was Nebuchadnezzar's servant 3 years when he rebelled. That's the history we read here in chapter 1 and chapter 2. Uh so now let's jump over to, now when you read chapter 2, um, and I believe one of the captains is actually going through, giving the sense A to Z, is actually going through the book of Daniel. Check that out because he's going line by line each chapter more in depth. But when you read Daniel chapter 2, also Watch and Read did a excellent visualization of Daniel the second chapter. Check that out as well. When you read chapter 2, basically Nebuchadnezzar dream, and when he woke up, he couldn't remember the dream. And basically, he called all the Chaldeans and his soothsayers, basically telling them that y'all need to tell me what the dream was and interpret the dream, but they couldn't. So basically, he put out a decree. He was going to kill all the Chaldeans, the soothsayers, the magicians, and Babylon. And Daniel was a part of that group. Remember, he was a eunuch in the king's palace. Um, so the Lord, he went and prayed to the Lord, him, Azariah, Hananiah, Ishael. And the Lord put the spirit on Daniel and gave him the understanding, gave him what the dream was and the understanding there. So he went to Nebuchadnezzar and told him the dream of what was going to happen. And that was the dream of the basically the image, that the great image he saw, which was the head of gold, the breast and arms of silver, the belly of brass, the feet of iron, uh, I mean, the legs of iron and the feet of iron mixed with clay. and that was going into the times of the Gentiles, those nations that we're living in right now. Babylon being that head of gold, um, that breast and arms of silver being that being Persian and Mede, belly uh, being um, Greece, and then the legs of iron being Rome, and then of course that feet of iron mixed with partly mixed with clay going into America. Uh, in the captivity we're living today. So now let's jump over to chapter 3 and verse 1. This is Daniel chapter 3, verse 1. So now, after all that took place, basically, Nebuchadnezzar made, matter of fact, let's start at chapter 2 and verse uh 48. It says, then the king made Daniel a great man and gave him many gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief of the governors of all the wise men of Babylon. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Daniel, of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. Why? Because he was basically put over all the province of Babylon. So now let's jump to chapter 3, verse 1. Chapter 3, verse 1. It says, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits, and set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sat and gathered together the princes and the governors and the captains and the judges, the treasurers and the counselors, sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the princes and the governors and the captains and the judges and the treasurers and the counselors and the sheriffs and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the Lord gave Nebuchadnezzar a vision, dream, chapter 2. Daniel gave him the interpretation of the dream, but he still set up an idol. And when we get to chapter 4, the Lord fully humbles Nebuchadnezzar to the point to where he was like, oh, yes, Lord, I understand that you rule in the kingdom of men. Um, Nebuchadnezzar got fully humbled. But here in chapter 3, here it is, he sets up an idol, and now he makes everyone to worship the idol. Matter of fact, let's jump down to verse 4. It says, then an herald cried aloud, to you it is commanded, O people, nations, languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. And whoso falleth not down and worship shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Therefore, at the time when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, the harp, the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So he put out a decree that whenever you heard the sound of music, all these different instruments playing, you were to bow down and worship this golden image that Nebuchadnezzar created. Now, let's jump down to verse. We're gonna jump down to verse 14. So as you read on, Azariah, Mishael, and Hananiah, whose names was changed to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they didn't worship. When that music played, they did not bow down and worship the golden image. And the Chaldeans basically used that to sought occasion against them to get them thrown in a fiery furnace. Because you got to put yourself into history. Because a lot of times, Bishop Kanai says it all the time too. A lot of times we read this as just ink on a page, but put yourself there. These are living words. This stuff happened. It's not a fairy tale. So think about it. Here it is in chapter 1. You had an incident where Daniel and the three holy children, which we're going to read that here in a minute. Azariah, Mishael, and Azariah, Mishael, and Hananiah. They were brought into the king's palace. When you read chapter 1, all the eunuchs were given a certain provision of meat, but they decided, because they didn't want to defile themselves, we give us this. But the captain of the guard, he was he didn't want to do that, because what they were asking. Matter of fact, chapter 1, verse, I'm gonna read verse 8 real quick. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile themselves. And essentially, verse 12, it says, Provide thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat, drink, and water to drink. So that's all Daniel ate, because he didn't want to defile themselves. But when you read on, so think about it. Those other Chaldeans that were in the same young youths that were being brought up as eunuchs, ate of the king's meat, and they were basically, they looked healthy and all that, because that's why the prince of the eunuch didn't want to do it, because they would have to go into the king, and he thought that they would look malnutrition, things of that nature. But Daniel was like, no, give it to us and you'll see. And when you look, they were far more healthier and more, matter of fact, and their countenance looked far greater than those that ate the king's meat. So you don't think them Chaldeans and then them soothsayers and them other eunuchs that was in there didn't look at these dudes like, who is these Hebrews up in here? And then you get to chapter 2, where the Chaldeans and the magicians is coming in, and they can't interpret the dream, nor can they even tell the king what the dream was. But here you have Daniel, who the spirit of the Lord put on him, comes in here and does it. You don't think they turned a blind eye? You don't think, I mean, not a blind eye. You don't think they had they looked at him kind of funny, like, who is this slave? Who is this slave coming in here outdoing us and outshining us? And then he gets put over all the province, and then he brings three holy children with him, his boys with him. But when you get to chapter 3, best believe they were looking for any type of reason to get to basically get them in trouble, in lack of better words. So when you get to chapter 3, that's what they did. They seen, oh, the king gave an order and they're not following it. Oh, let's go tell them. Let's go tell them. Matter of fact, chapter 3, verse 9. It says, chapter 3, verse 8. It says, Wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. You don't think they was quick to accuse the Jews? Because remember, they were put over the affairs of the province of Babylon. They were put up in a high position. You don't think that made them salty? Them Chaldeans were salty. Many of them probably was eyeing those positions. Well, probably was looking at those positions, and now you have these slaves, these children of the captivity. Now they ruling over us. So they found their accusation against the Jews to bring to the king. Verse 10. Reason why I went through all that, just to put yourself in the history of what happened. Uh to help better, it'll help paint a better picture of what was going on during that time. All right, verse 9. It says, They spake and said unto the king of Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whosoever falleth not down and worship, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. They could, you know, they couldn't wait to go tell the king that. Watch verse 13. It says, Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now, if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psaltery, the dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made. Well, but if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God which shall deliver you out of my hands? Okay, so you don't want to bow down and worship my gods. I'm gonna cast you into the fiery furnace. And what God is gonna deliver you out of that? That's what he's saying. Watch this. Verse 16. Watch the response. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. Meaning, we ain't afraid, nor are we gonna beat around the bush in answering this matter. It says, if it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. That's right there. That's heavy. And this verse right here is something we should be meditating on today. Because this is an example. God delivered them, as we read on, God delivered them out of the fiery furnace. Guess what? That nuclear fire is coming, and the Lord is going to deliver some of us out of it. And some of us might get burnt up in that fire. Some of us might die before the fire. But the point is right here, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whether the God delivered them from that fire or not, let it be known that we will not serve any other God but the God of our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We're going to keep God's commandments. And that's got to be our mentality in this truth, understanding. That's why the scriptures talk about striving unto death. This is the type of mentality we got to have even to today, because they was prepared. These men right here were prepared to die. They were prepared to die for for the Most High. That's why they said, verse 18 again, it says, but if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden images which thou hast set up. Whether God delivers us or not in this fiery furnace, we ain't bending, nor are we wavering. We're prepared to die. That's what they're saying. Watch this. Let's read on. Verse 19. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He was pissed. He was on tens. It says, therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 17 times more than it was wont to be heated. He said, listen, heat that thing 7 times more than you normally heat it for anybody else that we throw in there. Watch this. Watch how hot it was. It says, and he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Hey, this right here let you know our forefathers wasn't nothing to play with either. He had to go get the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So that lets you know right there, they knew something about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from past. So you got to read between the lines when it comes to the history of why would he go get the most mighty men in his army to bind them? Because they knew, okay, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these dudes ain't nothing to play with. Go get the most mighty men, bind them up tight. Verse 21, it says, then these men were bound in their coats and their hosen and their hats and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That fire was so hot that the men that put Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fire, it killed them because it was so hot. Verse 23, it says, and these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the fiery furnace. Now, I'm going to stop right here, verse 23, because once they got into the fiery furnace, so you can mark this, highlight this, mark this in your Bible between verse 23 and 24. That's where three holy children fit in. Because They were bound and they were put into the midst of the fiery furnace. Once they closed the door, threw them in the fiery furnace, closed the door. Now let's go to 300 children. This is what they did. Three holy children. Let's go to three holy. We're not going to read the whole thing, but we'll read a few pieces from it. So, three holy children. It says, and they walked in the midst of the fire, praising God and blessing the Lord. So once they threw, this is where it's heavy. They got thrown into the fire. The people, the men that threw them into the fire killed them. They the fire killed them, but here you have Azariah, Hananiah, and Mishael. They were walking in the midst of the fire, praising God and blessing the Lord. Watch this, verse 2. Then Azariah stood up and prayed on this manner and opened his mouth in the midst of the fire. Now he's in the midst of the fire and he begins to pray to the Lord. It says, blessed art thou, O Lord, God of our fathers. Thy name is worthy to be praised and glorified forevermore. For thou art righteous in all the things that thou hast done to us. Yea, true are all thy works, thy ways are right, and all thy judgments truth. In all the things that thou hast brought upon us, and upon the holy city of our fathers, even Jerusalem, thou hast executed true judgment. For according to truth and judgment didst thou bring all these things upon us, because we have sinned. For we have sinned and committed iniquity, departing from thee. This was always the temperament of our forefathers. He got in there and immediately was humble. He's like, listen, everything you doing to us, God, is true. Your judgment is true because we have sinned. He didn't say my people have sinned. He said we have sinned. Remember, they were righteous in the sight of God. They were righteous men. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, these were righteous men that fear God and keep his commandments. We just read earlier, they was willing to die for the truth. They wasn't bending, but they still had enough understanding to know God is dealing with us on a larger level. We as a nation, we have sinned. That's why we in this situation. Verse 7, it says, all these things, all these things have we trespassed and not obeyed thy commandments, nor kept them, neither done as thou hast commanded us, that it might go well with us. Wherefore, all that thou hast brought upon us, everything thou hast done to us, thou hast done in true judgment. Watch this, verse 9. I read all the way down to get to verse 9. It says, and, and thou didst deliver us into the hands of lawless enemies, most hateful forsakers of God, and to an unjust king, and to the most wicked in all the world. That's where God delivered us. God delivered us to the most wicked, and that's what we're living right now. God delivered us. When you read in Malachi 1, even in this captivity, we were delivered to the most wicked. That's why you read Malachi 1. These were men of understanding. They were prophesying. Uh when you read in Malachi 1 where it talks about Esau is the border of wickedness. God delivered us into the most wicked and vile man on this earth, Esau. Watch this, verse 10. And now we cannot open our mouths. We are become a shame and a reproach to thy servants and to them that worship thee. Yet deliver us not up wholly, for thy name's sake, neither dishonor thou thy covenant, and cause not thy mercy to depart from us. So now he's saying, even though all that, don't cause your mercy to depart from us. Remember, and as you read on, he says, remember the covenant. Uh, 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 Basically have mercy for us for Abraham's sake, for Isaac's sake, for Israel's sake. And as you read on, he goes into he basically starts blessing, basically giving acknowledgement to the Father. When you get a chance, read the whole book of Three Holy Children. It's a prayer all the way down to basically it's a prayer that they were praying, that Azarias was praying while those three were in the fiery furnace. So now let's go back to Daniel. So that's where you will put this. You will put this right there between verse 23 and 24, because that's when it took place. So while they're in the fire furnace praying, Nebuchadnezzar and everyone on the outside, this is what they see. Let's go back to Daniel 3 and verse 23 again. It says, and these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. They began to stand. Azariah stood up. They were walking around in the midst. And Azariah began to pray. Um, Verse 24. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished and rose up in haste and spake and said unto his counselors, did not we cast three men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, true, O king. He's like, wait a minute. Didn't we only cast three and three men into the mist? I ain't tripping, am I? And they answered, true, O king. Verse 25. He answered and said, lo, I see four men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. So who was there? Christ. Christ was right there in the midst of those three holy children, Azariah, Mishael, and Hananiah. So Nebuchadnezzar is like, wait a minute. They walking around. Remember, we just read in Three Holy Children, they were walking around. Nebuchadnezzar seen this. Wait a minute, they walking around. He's praying, and I see a fourth man that looks like the Son of God. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Watch this. Verse 26. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire, and the princes and governors and captains and the king's counselors began gathering together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was there a hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of the fire had passed on them. Man, that's heavy right there. Ooh. Same thing, we go through that fire. Understand that. That's where your faith, you gotta believe that just like our forefathers went through that fire in that fire furnace, when them bombs dropped during this time, and you hear that the Lord will protect you the same way during as we pass through and go through that fire. Verse 28. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who have sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him and had changed the king's word and yielded their bodies. Remember, he mocked God earlier in the chapter when he told him, he said, y'all gonna act like this? I'm gonna throw you in the fiery furnace, and what God is gonna deliver you. Nebuchadnezzar found out real quick the one true living God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's the one who's going to deliver his prophets, those who fear him. Verse 28 again. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who have sent his angels and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's words and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any God except their own. Therefore, I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which spake anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces. The houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So they got promoted after all that, and Nebuchadnezzar put out a decree that no one is to speak against the God of basically the God of Israel, because there's no other God that can deliver of sort that they would deliver. So I'm gonna put a stop right there. There will be a part four next week. But it'll be a short part four of Babylon going into Persian and Mede. Um Persian and Mede captivity. So right now we're where we're at in history in Babylon. We're still around that time of Jehoiakim that were taken captive, leading into Jehoiachin, that second wave. Um, and for those that are in Babylon, we'll pick up for those that are in Babylon, going all the way up until uh, Persian and Mede comes and destroys Babylon. Because Nebuchadnezzar, there's still a lot more history of things that took place while our forefathers was in Babylon during those that during this the same thing that during the time those that were going through what they were going through in Jerusalem. there was a lot going on during the time of Babylon, similar to what we read in the Assyrian captivity, how you had things going on in Nineveh with Tobit, as well as things going on in Jerusalem, Hezekiah, Josiah, or Manasseh, things of that nature. But with Babylon, there's a lot more history and a lot more, uh, not necessarily that took place, but that was documented that took place. So with that, I'm gonna end it right there. I pray y'all got some understanding. Like I said, go back and watch part one and part two. It's on IUIC Oklahoma's page. Just to bring you up to speed of what took place in Babylon. Like I said, today's lesson was what was taking place, or not what took place in Babylon, but what took place in Jerusalem. Today's lesson was what took place in Babylon during this time. So go back and watch it. Pray y'all got some understanding. All praise to the Most High. Shalom. Christ bless.